So I have here the brand new 2022 MacBook Air with the M2 chip, which is the latest iteration of Apple's best-selling MacBook and the latest addition to the MacBook lineup. It's a brand new design for the MacBook Air, which brings with it the new generation M2 processor and a few other pretty noticeable upgrades. So stick around and let's take a look. Looking at the boxes here, you'll notice that the two boxes have MacBook Air logos that are color matched with the MacBook itself. It's a nice little touch there, and as you'll see later, there's a bit more color matching to come. Alright, so this year there are two stock configurations for you to choose from. I've got the upgraded configuration here, which has the new M2 chip of course, configured with an 8-core CPU and a 10-core GPU, 8 gigs of unified memory, 512 gigs of SSD storage, a 13.6-inch Liquid Retina display, a 1080p webcam, a MagSafe 3 charging port, and 2 Thunderbolt/USB 4 ports. You also have the option of getting the base configuration, with the difference being that you get an M2 chip that's configured with an 8-core GPU and a downgraded 256 gigs of SSD storage. Just a quick note, there have already been reports that the base model 256 gig SSD storage performs slower than other variants on benchmarks because of the single NAND chip, so that's something to keep in mind. Of course, you are able to spec either configuration to your heart's content with a variety of different options for storage and unified memory, but you'll probably have to wait a bit longer to receive your MacBook if you go down that route. Alright, inside you'll find your MacBook Air, some paperwork, color matched Apple stickers, can't wait to use those, a USB-C to MagSafe charging cable colored matched with your MacBook Air, and your power adapter. For the power adapter, you actually have a couple of options, and whether or not you'll be able to fast charge your MacBook will depend on your power adapter. With the base model MacBook Air, you'll only be getting a single port 30-watt USB-C charger. Of course, for an extra $20, you are able to upgrade your charger to either a 35-watt dual USB-C adapter or a 67-watt adapter. You'll be able to charge two devices with the dual 35-watt adapter, but the 67-watt adapter is the one you're after if you want to fast charge your MacBook, charging 50% of your battery in 30 minutes. Now, with the upgraded configuration, you have the choice of either the 35-watt dual USB-C power adapter or the single 67-watt adapter included. Just make sure you choose the power adapter you want when you're ordering your MacBook. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, this year's MacBook Air features a brand new design for this lineup, which is heavily influenced by the current chassis we're seeing on the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, which means the lid has been flattened out, the edges have been rounded off, and they've replaced the old tapered design for a more uniform body. The new design is still thinner than the thickest point of the old design though, coming in at 1.13 centimeters or 0.44 inches, and still manages to be lighter than last year's model, weighing just 1.24 kilos or 2.7 pounds. And picking it up, the weight, or I guess lack of weight, is something you'll definitely notice because it's quite a light and portable form factor, and I think it'll be a pretty good device to use on the move. Underneath the MacBook, the feet are now flat, but it doesn't have that cool MacBook logo that's on last year's MacBook Pros. Now, this is a completely fanless design. As you can see, there are no ventilation ports underneath, which means it will be completely quiet in operation, but that does mean you have to rely on the environment to dissipate the heat. I think for most users it's going to be fine, but the M2 is a more power-hungry chip, so you might run into some issues if you're planning to push the chip for a prolonged period of time. I'll need to test it out to find out more, so make sure you subscribe for a full-length review. Alright, for colors, as you can see, I've got the brand new midnight color, but there are also 3 other color options. You can also get the MacBook Air in silver, starlight, or space gray. For anyone who watched my review of last year's MacBook Pro, you'll know I love the look of the new redesign there, and I love the look of the redesign here. Now, ports. You do get an extra port with this new model. On the right, you have your 3.5mm headphone jack, same as last year. But on the left, you have 2 Thunderbolt ports plus the new MagSafe 3 port, which will go nicely with your color-matched charging cable. So you have 2 options to charge your MacBook. You can either use the MagSafe port with the included MagSafe cable, which will protect your MacBook from being dragged off the table in case someone trips over your charging cable. Or you can charge via the Thunderbolt ports if you have a USB-C cable. Keep in mind you'll only be able to fast charge with the 67-watt adapter. Alright, opening this thing up, you'll see what's probably the most striking difference between last year's model and this year's, and that's the display. Following in the footsteps of the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, the bezels are significantly thinned out. Even though the footprint of this year's MacBook Air is pretty much the same as the 2020 model, the screen is larger, coming in at 13.6 inches. It has a 2560 by 1664 resolution, and the brightness has also been increased from 400 nits to 500 nits. It's really nice to look at, and it has that gloss finish, so the colors are going to pop. Underneath the display, they've also removed the MacBook Air logo, so there's no MacBook Air labeling on this entire laptop. Up top, you'll see the notch, which I guess has become part of Apple's MacBook aesthetic. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know I'm not the biggest fan of the notch, but I will say it has gotten a lot less distracting. Would I still prefer not having a notch? Yes, but it's not the end of the world, and I'd definitely take having the notch over having thick bezels any day. The notch houses the new 1080p webcam, which is a handy upgrade for anyone's work from home setup. Unfortunately, unlike the iPhone, the MacBook's notch does not feature Face ID. Now the keyboard. Although this MacBook Air borrows a lot of its design traits from the MacBook Pros, this keyboard does not have the same black anodized well, which can be a positive or a negative depending on how you look at it. Yes, it doesn't have that cool new design, but it does mean that dust and fingerprints aren't going to show up as easily, unless you opt for this midnight colored MacBook Air. Having picked it up just a couple of times, I'm already seeing a fair few fingerprints. Okay, the keyboard still feels great this year. It's still the scissor switch mechanism, which is great to see. It has a decent amount of key travel and a very pleasant sound. Taking design cues from the Pro MacBook range, you do have full-size function keys up top with a larger Touch ID fingerprint scanner. They're a nice bonus. They'll be a lot easier to hit and easier to use. Alright, that's my hands-on with the M2 Macbook Air. It's a pretty promising device, but there's still a lot of features I want to test out, like its performance under sustained loads and the battery life. So make sure you subscribe for a full-length review. And let me know if there's anything you want me to test out in the comments below. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.